Local programming on KRWG made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to Your Legislators, a production of KRWG Broadcasting. Your Legislators is a public service program providing our viewing audience in southern New Mexico the opportunity to hear about important legislative issues directly from their elected representatives in Santa Fe.
I'm Glenn Cerny, and pleased to welcome you to another weekly taping of Your Legislators. And we're up at the State House this week, and very pleased to once again be sitting down with Senator Howie Morales. And first of all, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Glenn. Love to be here every year. Always appreciate your visits.
Well, and the first one's an easy question. One of the things we do is to talk about exactly where you represent. And I would say Silver City, but it's actually a much bigger district than just Silver City.
It is. It's a large Senate district that represents all of Grant County, Catron County, and Socorro County. So I travel quite a bit within my district, but I love my district.
Having worked in sales and also around political houses, you know, we often joke about having pictures that we could use to perhaps influence yours. And I do have a lovely picture that I'm sure you're going to be a hit when you finally get down to home again with the kids of you with Nature Cat when our sister station, KNME, was from Albuquerque, was up here. And there are lighter moments up here despite all the seriousness, aren't there?
Absolutely. I enjoyed taking the picture. I enjoyed the visit. I kind of teased and said that we had new House members that were in the Senate chamber at the time, but love to have the visit there, and thank you for the picture.
Well, one of the things I enjoy is when I'm at PBS events is, you know, we're all supposed to be professional and we're supposed to be, and then the characters show up and we're all 3 years old again.
Absolutely, become kids all over again, just as it was that day.
Let's get to the business at hand. And you know, one of the things that you know frustrates voters quite a bit is the disconnect between parties, between House, Senate, and the governor. And can you reflect a little bit on the issue right off the bat, still trying to settle the FY17 budget and a discrepancy between what the House wanted and what the Senate overwhelmingly approved that really delayed things here a little bit?
Yeah, we're starting this year's session. We actually didn't get into the actual legislative session that's at hand because we're dealing with the shortfall from this current fiscal year. That really changed up the pace of how we were doing things. Right from the beginning, we were right at work trying to have the solvency for the fiscal year 17 budget, and it was real interesting on what took place. Of course, in the Senate, we tend to have more bipartisan support, have discussions that we can live with, and we pass things through. On the House, it was a different story, and there was some concerns that took some delays that took into account education issues, took into account sweeps that were going to be taken from other funds, as well as the courts and the judicial system. We haven't fully completed those issues at this point, as I think that our courts are still very much in jeopardy of holding up the constitutional requirement that they're supposed to be doing. They can't do that without funds, and the Senate really tried to put those funds in there to help out to make sure that we can move forward.
And just to remind everyone, the state of New Mexico must have a balanced budget. There cannot take a deficit, is what you were referring to. Well, and you're kind of on the hot seat here right now. You are a member of the Senate Finance Committee, and can you tell us a little bit of what that body does and what their responsibility is?
The Senate Finance Committee is part of the work that takes place is balancing the budget, just as you stated. We're the last stop of the budget process, and so as it comes over from the House, the Senate will look at it, refine it, make some additions, take some things out of the budget that we need to do to balance it, and it really has been an eye-opener. Since I've come in since 2009, on Senate Finance Committee, we've really had to deal with mostly cuts, and I think that that's something that we have to reconsider and seeing how we can approach growing New Mexico, helping our economy grow. And what's been indicated these last few years, unfortunately, the cuts just haven't been have proven to be beneficial for the state as we continue to spiral economically.
Well, and obviously the problem is you are looking to increase revenue somewhere or cut costs. And really, I don't think if you talk to anyone, first one, everybody admits, especially Senator Smith, that the state is having financial difficulties beyond anything he has even seen before, and that some way revenue has to be raised because cuts just can't go much further, is the attitude.
Absolutely, and Senator Smith has been a wonderful chairman. I've learned a lot from him. The discussions that we've had really do revolve around what can we do to balance our budget but help it to grow. Unfortunately, what we've many times we focused on was the oil and gas revenues and the surpluses that we've experienced from that. But just like anything else, I come from a mining community, and the ups and downs of the prices really take into account and affect what happens with our state budget. We haven't rebounded, and because of that, we're in a position that we're either going to have to cut more from our courts, our judicial system, our schools, our CYFD programs that protect children. All these state agencies that that are extremely important to all parts of New Mexico. We have the question now: do we cut those more, or do we amputate programs, or do we find ways to have revenue that's going to be reflective of the budget crisis that we're in?
Well, the New Mexico Center on Law and Poverty had a article today, and if I just read a couple of the figures in here, 72% of New Mexican voters oppose reducing funding for public education. Also for Medicaid, which is a whole nother one. And 71% of voters either support or are neutral to increasing taxes on household earnings. So there's some things in the public that seem to be, can I use the term acceptable? I don't think anybody's ever thrilled about tax increases, but are you aware of some of that sentiment and those beliefs?
Absolutely, and I think it comes down to trying to protect what we have. When you have vital services that are being affected, that's a concern. And so the public is seeing that we're not getting out of this, that cutting our way through is just not working for the people of the state of New Mexico. We have to have different approaches. I think long term, there's things that we need to be doing, looking at renewables, looking at other sources of funding instead of relying just on the extractive industries. But for now, what we need to do is we need to look at areas that we can increase revenue and raise that revenue to at least keep our levels where they're currently at.
Has there been any movement on finding at least some acceptable, I know one thing was cutting loopholes, or some areas that seem to be agreeable for the House, the governor, and the Senate?
I think that when you look in the majority of the people of the state of New Mexico, we pay our taxes, we work hard, and one of the concerns that I have is the reduction in corporate income tax. I think that really had an impact that was far more than just reducing the income tax from the corporation side of it. We haven't seen the benefits from that. We've actually seen tremendous loss within our tax base. But we've also seen the impacts at the local levels with hold harmless provisions being pulled, meaning that taxes have had to be raised. They've been raised at the local levels, unfortunately, because the state wasn't willing to do so. I think that when you have discussions of some areas that we can look for raising revenues, I brought forward a tobacco tax last year. That's not going to be a long-term solution, but it is one that seems to have bipartisan support throughout the state of an area that we can raise $45 million. For every dollar that we're able to raise, that's one less dollar that has to be cut from classroom spending, or one less dollar that has to be cut from our corrections or our law enforcement side of it. These are important, and the people of the state of New Mexico are at a point where they recognize these are just things that we may have to do now.
Well, and for disclosure here, I'm obviously housed at New Mexico State University, and you have a very strong education background as well. But there's, as frustrating it is for us as citizens, I can't imagine, because there's just an endless cycle here. One of the things you're doing is taking money from the school districts to help cover FY17, which means the school districts can't be as robust in looking at programs and working on challenges that they have. I mean, it's just a back and forth that there's no easy way out.
You're absolutely right. Again, if for every cut that we do, it takes us that much longer to recover, that much longer to have opportunities for creativity, for growth. And looking at the higher ed side of it, I know a discussion that's often brought up is we can just cut higher ed because they can raise tuition to cover that. Well, each time you raise tuition, that just limits growth to the universities, which limits many individuals who may even come to our state to get an education here. It doesn't work, and I think that this is the approach that we need to take, of a well-balanced approach to budgeting. We can't tax our way out of this recession. We can't cut our way out of this recession. It needs to be a balanced approach, and I'm hoping that both sides and both chambers will understand and take this approach.
Well, and again, with my ties in New Mexico State, and you have Western New Mexico in your neighborhood, those are vital institutions, and trying to give education opportunities to lower income families is just part of this. What we keep being told is how we're going to get out of this cycle.
I've always said that our way, our most vital tool in economic development is through education. That's the reason why I'm here today, because of education and all those individual educators and people who stood by me to help get me to where I'm at. I want to make sure that I never forget that and continue to advocate for all levels of education, whether it's early ed through higher ed, onto those who get their adult basic education. All those are education pieces that will get us out of this unfortunate downward spiral that we see.
Yeah, and it is. It's just one of those things that keeps cycling, and it goes back from pre-K to elementary to our high schools. But, I mean, some good news, it appears that graduation rates have been on the rise. So somebody's working very hard in the public school system in New Mexico to gain some of that success.
I have no doubt that those public educators all across the state are working extremely hard, despite all the challenges, despite not having any increase in pay, despite the threats of having their pay actually cut. They love those students, they educate those students, and we've seen the difference there. It's important that the state of New Mexico recognizes and values every one of our educators in our school systems.
Yeah, and again, it's an issue that it's been how many years since there's been any increase in state employees' pay here?
It's been so many years, I've lost track, unfortunately, and it seems like we've been in defense mode many times, not just for teachers and educators at the higher ed portion, but all state employees who daily give their best to make sure that they're doing what's asked of them.
You know, one of the issues that I'm wondering if we're seeing the tip of the iceberg, and again, it's in your district, it's Santa Clara, that they were applying for some voucher payments on some invoice payments with the New Mexico Environment Department, and we're told not to submit them anymore, which means monies they've already expended, they're hung out to dry. Now, it was taken care of, I need to add.
Yeah, and I appreciate that the village and my community got with me right away, because it was a surprise. And when the work's already been done, they basically fronted all the money for this, submitted their receipts to have the reimbursement, and to be told we're not going to honor that. I had a concern with that and immediately drafted a letter, asked for reconsideration. We were told that the reason because of checking to see what happened with our capital outlay solvency budget, but that didn't make sense to me because the grant was already awarded and the agreement was already done. And fortunately, they came in and reimbursed the village. But my concern is that there could be other types of pulling back of funds that local communities have already expected to have reimbursed.
And while I'm sure Santa Clara was outstandingly pleased to have it taken care of, I'm also thinking about the state employees going, I don't have the money to give you. I mean, it puts them in a very precarious situation.
It does. And again, when you look at population growth and actually the lack of growth here in the state, these are the things that we have to really keep mind of, as it's so easy for individuals to want to leave the state. Arizona's thriving, Texas is thriving, Colorado's thriving, all around us. We've got to do what we can do. We got to do our best to make sure we're keeping these individuals here in the state and not having these kind of concerns that are causing panic in many areas.
As you sit and ponder at night, because I know you're not sleeping here thinking about all this stuff going on, but what do you see as some possible venues for you and the Senate and the Senate Finance Committee to encourage economic development and start generating and get this engine going again?
When you talk about economic development, the common thought is what we can do to attract, to bring people in. I've had a different approach all along, and you talk about economic gardening and growing from within. We have many small businesses who are ready to thrive. We're ready to do what needs to be done and be committed to the state, but it doesn't seem like the system is set up for that ability to thrive. When I talk about working from the inside out, I mean that we need to focus on those jobs, on those people, on those businesses within our state, provide the services that are needed, the tax incentives that could be there to help out, to continually take the approach that we're going to have the home run hitters swinging for the fences to bring in all these big industries and companies to come in. It's not going to work. What we need to focus on is the basics, but really means so much to the people in New Mexico. We can't expect to attract businesses being last or near last in education. we can't expect when we have our child poverty and child well-being rates where they're at, our hunger levels at the levels that they're at, those aren't going to be attracting to businesses. We need to focus on those and deal with the poverty issues in the state. And I think there's many ways that we can do that. I'm going to continually be a proponent for early childhood education and the resources that we can provide there, so that way those students will have a fighting chance when they get to the higher ed age, that the lottery scholarship will really be a benefit to them rather than a drain on our budget.
And it isn't like there hasn't been any economic growth. I mean, I look at Santa Teresa, but has that been felt positively in the other part? And it's a big state, so I mean, to expect something happening in the southern corner in Santa Teresa, but I mean, has that even hit Grant County or the other counties in the immediate vicinity of Santa Teresa?
I think that could be an example of what can be done in other parts of the state, but to make that sustainable. I think that's going to be the key, is how we can continually make things sustainable and make it work for the people of the state of New Mexico. I'm hopeful that that we can get to that point, but again, continually having discussions about cuts and what needs to be done with that, it's not going to get us to the levels we need to be.
And you know, the theory is, as it's been told to me, and I obviously am not anything close to an expert on Santa Fe activities, was, you know, the short session's all about the budget. The long session's about issues and whatnot. But there's just been an incredible amount of time consumed with the budget in this long session. Is there progress being made on the other issues we're confronting?
It seems like all the issues are revolving around the budget this year. So it's really interesting, whether it's crime, whether it's the education piece, whether it's economic development, it's all hinging on what dollars that we can provide there. It does concern me when we talk about growth in certain areas, though, and one of those areas, probably the only area that we've seen, is the healthcare sector, and the growth that we've seen there. With the changes that could come from the federal level could really have a devastating effect on the state of New Mexico. I predict we'll probably be in special session later this year dealing alone just with Medicaid issues.
As tired as you seemed when you walked into the room, the thought of already anticipating a special session must be frightening.
It's just part of the job, and we try to do what we can. So I do appreciate the dialogue. I appreciate the debate. But more so is I appreciate when we come up with strong solutions, because this is my state. This is my home where I was born and raised. It's important that we get this right.
Can I move on to a couple of other issues here? And one of them is the Department of Taxation and Revenue. We're once again hearing problems with the two-tier licensing. And I think one of the issues there, and I'm thrilled that in an interview I can finally quote Gary Trudeau and Doonesbury, but they were all waiting for their driver's license, complaining about that they don't drive. And they says, well, then why do you need a driver's license? And the response was to vote, travel, and to drink. What's the issue? I thought it was settled a session ago, and we'd finally had everything resolved, but there seems to be some issues with it.
I think there's been a lot of issues with the discussion that took place dating back to 2011. There was some concern that were brought out with some proposals that were brought forward that were going to bring a lot of the confusion that we see right now. It's not fair to the people of the state of New Mexico when they go in to get a new license and all the requirements that are in place right there. I think that when you can do things for political purposes, and you can have issues that are out there and want changes for the sake of change, but unfortunately innocent people across the state of New Mexico are being affected by pieces of legislation that was passed. And and this was something that I warned about as the debates took place of what needed to be done. I wanted to make sure we did it right, and judging by complaints that I get and many other legislators get, we didn't do it correct.
Well, and the humor of Doonesbury aside, I mean, some simple things like people in the Las Cruces area not being able to get onto the military bases with their New Mexico IDs is going to be an issue.
Yeah, I thought that some of that was cleared up as far as for an extension that was given, and that's part of the Real ID compliance portion of it. I think that that's always going to be a concern with the Real ID from the federal government, but I do think that there's approaches we could have taken in the state of New Mexico to alleviate some of these confusions at the state. I have to tip my hat to all those motor vehicle department employees. I've been in there, and I've seen the many times that they've been yelled at, people really frustrated. They're just carrying out what the regulations have in place. And so I want to sincerely thank all those employees for the work that they do.
But again, it goes back to putting state employees in a difficult situation,
Yes.
defending policies that you haven't been able to take care of as a senator, and as a regular citizens, it really becomes an issue. Payday loans. On the surface, you talk to most people and say, what's the problem? 37% interest, 20%, it's way too high. But their folks have some legitimate concerns of where else can people that are strapped for cash get short-term loans. So it isn't, well, it's easy to question. There is some validity to that argument. Is there a way out of that?
Yeah, I carried some legislation back in 2009 dealing with payday lending and the concerns there, trying to cap it at 36%. That's still extremely high, but when you look at the percentages that are out there and you talk about a poverty state, it seems like we're going to continue to struggle with poverty when people get into debt and continually have more debt. And so this is something that it's a heavy lift in the state of New Mexico. There's a lot of lobby efforts to protect the payday industry practices. And you talk about free choice. I mean, people having a choice and making their own decisions to go and receive these loans, but the long-term effects are really having a big impact on our state, similar to what the housing market impact took place that took us down to the national recession back in 2008.
Well, and you can add student loans to that as well, the difficulty that so many students have trying to get rid of the debt after getting a degree.
Perfect example.
Or not getting a degree, even worse, that it's still there. Some discussion about revealing names on job applicants. And on one hand, there's a transparency issue there, no question. But on the other hand, if you are employed and looking to put yourself in that, may have a chilling effect on the quality of candidates.
I think so. I think that does have a concern there. If you have an individual, high quality individual who's interested in a position, but the concern there of what impact that may come and what unintended consequences may come with that, I can see the logic behind that. But I also have to stand for transparency, and the public deserves to know whatever is taking place within city, county, or state government.
Ask a question about, I guess it was a couple years ago, ran for governor. Has that experience helped you be a better senator?
It has. There's things that I think back and say, maybe I shouldn't have ran. But when I ran, I really felt in my heart that education was going to be a big issue, continues to be a big issue. And fortunately, with my background, I felt that I was the strongest candidate to bring forward those issues within the state. It's been a wonderful experience. I met so many beautiful people across the whole state. But more importantly is I got to learn the issues from every part, from the eastern side all the way to the northwest, all the way through central part of New Mexico, that really helped me as my legislative role. When there's discussions that are taking place, I know the issues, and I've been fortunate to be right in the middle of some of those discussions. A lot of times you can focus on just your Senate district and do what's important there. This has really taught me to be there for the whole state of New Mexico.
Smiling is one of the things I've learned at KRWG. One of the beautiful things about people that live in the land of enchantment. If you ask them what they think, they will tell you.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. And I think that, again, I go back to say we have a choice, and where we choose to live is our choice. I choose to live and raise my kids in New Mexico. Therefore, we need to make it the best state we can possibly make it.
Take a breath, and I know you're in the middle of right now a meeting in the Finance Committee, but are there some things that you see as being viable that you could get done fairly quickly here at this, we're about midway of the long session, that you see within grasp if maybe we can get one or two other things going?
I do. Of course, I'll be working on the budget to make sure that protect as best we can.
There we are, back to the budget.
Right, coming up with revenue options that we can reduce or eliminate cuts as much as possible. But I think that there's some things that can be done. I'm carrying a Health Security Act. There's concerns what's going to happen at a national level with the Affordable Care Act. We have the potential of leaving hundreds of thousands of New Mexicans without access to care. The Health Security Act could be not only New Mexico's solution to that, but the national solution, as there doesn't seem to be a plan B. The Health Security Act, which has support all across the state, provides access to care at an affordable price, and that's going to be key. And I would hope that the federal government, I've spoken with federal delegation, of looking at this opportunity that New Mexico can be a leader within the healthcare sector.
Real quick, there's two things, and my impression is it's much more active in the House than it is the Senate, but the legalization of marijuana and also the aid in dying bill, are those being discussed in the Senate chambers as well?
We haven't discussed those much in the Senate side. I believe that you're right, they're on the House side, but I've had constituents that have contacted me on both those issues, very much on the legalization part of it, very much evenly split, people supporting, people against it. I can tell you on the right to die bill, that one I've received a lot of support, or people in support of it, really from personal experiences. And the personal experiences, I had a lady who called me last week and shared when she was going through cancer treatment and just the strain that took place. And she felt strongly that it would have been her right to have done this. I listen to those and see as we have the discussions that take place. I haven't heard any of the debates yet, but I look forward to that and really rely on what my constituents reach out and tell me.
And we're getting really, I know you don't feel this way right now, but we're getting close toward at least getting to the end. Do you think they will come up in the Senate, or is that going to be postponed to a later date?
No, I believe that they'll be coming in. Of course, it goes through the process. I believe they maybe passed the first committee just in the House, so they still have a ways to go. But I do believe that we'll hear them in the Senate, and we should. Now, whether it gets to the committee process, I doubt these will come to the committee I sit on in finance. So the first chance I'll have to see or to hear and to vote on it will be when it gets to the Senate floor.
Senator Morales, I really appreciate your taking the time to chat with me. I honestly think that part of your motivation was just to get out of the clamor out there and sit in a quiet room and be able to think a little bit. But I know it's a busy time, and I appreciate you making space in the session to talk to us today.
Thank you, and I appreciate every year that you come in, and more so because it keeps the public informed. And so KRWG does a great job. New Mexico State University provides this, as I've gone to the studio many times, and this is what it needs to be about, is having an open dialogue with those people that are up here representing you.
And you're always welcome in the studio. I don't mind driving up here, but you're always welcome down in Las Cruces as well.
I'll take you up on that. Thank you.
I'm Glenn Cerny, and I want to thank you for being a part of our audience with your legislators this week. Remember, we'll be doing our best to keep you up to date on everything happening in Santa Fe. And always remember that this program is made possible because of donations from viewers like you. I'm Glenn Cerny. Enjoy the weekend.